questions and just give you a bit of a, I don't know, just things that I personally want to know about. I'm sure everybody else has loads of stuff that they're also going to be really interested in, but I'll turn my camera off so I'm not taking up half the screen, just for my own personal self-esteem issues. So the first thing, I mean, I think it's important that you guys introduce yourselves and just kind of give us an idea of how much time you spent in prison. You know, just give a bit of an introduction before we get into the Christmas related stuff. I'll let you take over.
That's fine. So nice to meet you all. But my name is Reece McLaren, and we're from an organisation called Changing the Narrative, which we set up earlier on in the year. I've spent 5 years in prison for numerous offences, and obviously I'll pass you over to Mark. He'll introduce yourself, and then we'll get down to what we've obviously been up to.
All right, yeah, I'm Mark. Yeah, how long have I spent in prison? I've spent about 2 years, maybe more, in the prison itself. 3 times, but once over Christmas.
And I've done 4 Christmases in prison, so I'm very skilled on this one.
You're the expert. Okay, so shall we start by talking about what your first experience, Reece, and your only experience, Mark, was like in prison over Christmas? How was your first Christmas?
So my first Christmas was, I was jailed for 10 months when I was 16 in 2011. And I was sent to a Young Offenders Institute, and I was jailed in November. So I was jailed on a weekend as well. So it was like, I was jailed on the Friday. So anyone who knows anything about prison knows that nothing happens on a weekend. So when I came out of my cell the next day, it was like everything was just locked down. There was nothing going on. And it was really adverse, to be honest. First time away from home, etc. And obviously then a month later, Christmas was coming round. And being away from home, and obviously at that time, and knowing that Christmas was coming, was very difficult for me. And I know it was very difficult for my family, because at that time, obviously, my family, obviously, we've always been a family unit. And all of a sudden I've been taken out. And I know that my family didn't really celebrate Christmas that year that much, because obviously I wasn't there. And it was awful, to be honest. I think there is a misconceived perception that Young Offenders Institutes aren't really like prisons, and they're like holiday camps with Xboxes, and but I'll be brutally honest with you, from my experience of being in that Young Offenders Institute, which was, it used to be a borstal, and a lot of the staff who was there in 2011 was still from that era. So, it was very like regimented. They still had bed packs. Anyone who doesn't know what a bed pack is, it's basically you've got to fold your clothing up in a square and put it on the end of your bed. It's like being in the army. And then Christmas comes around a month later. I've still not adjusted to being in prison. I never actually really did adjust on that sentence. And yeah, I had visits and stuff, but being away from home and being around strangers who I didn't know and I didn't particularly want to know was quite adverse. And I didn't really, like I say, settle in. And it was probably, to put it quite bluntly, was probably one of the worst periods of time in my life.
Yeah, it doesn't particularly sound nice, to be honest. Mark, what about you? How was your first and only experience in prison?
Right, well, I got jailed a few months before, well, 6 months before Christmas. So I had a lot of time to build up like supplies and boxes of chocolates and stuff like that. Coming up to Christmas, there was a church choir who recorded songs. It was good doing it, but when they played it back on the prison TV on Christmas Day, it was shocking. But then Christmas Day itself, I was thinking of my family. It was just a different sort of Christmas Day for me. It wasn't bad, but it was not special as well. But then, to be fair, I'd have thought New Year's Eve sort of affected people a lot more than Christmas.
That's really interesting. Why New Year's Eve? What is it about New Year's Eve? Because for me, I'm a Christmas girl. I'm not that bothered about New Year's. So what is it about New Year's?
What prison were you in at New Year's Eve?
Wandsworth.
I was in Wandsworth.
Yeah.
I'll give her a story about
Yeah.
New Year's Eve.
Well, it's like New Year's Eve. My cellmate, I think he was very reflective about stuff and locked up. And then it got to midnight. He was ringing his missus and stuff. He was crying. Had to give him a cuddle and calm him down. But I mean, it was just to some people, I think Christmas, and then to some people it were a New Year's Eve. But from what I gathered, and then because I was in Wandsworth, you could hear the fireworks as well at midnight, which sort of brought it back that you were in prison.
Okay, yeah. So maybe you can kind of deal with Christmas because it's sort of isolated, whereas New Year's Eve, there's stuff going on outside that you can hear. So, okay, interesting. Reece, I thought, were you going to say something about?
Yeah, I think in regards to New Year, I was in a high security unit in Doncaster, and when New Year came round, there's actually I know you've done time in Doncaster as well, but I don't know if he was doing this when he was there. But on New Year's Eve, so I was looking out the windows like helicopter wire and everything's just all locked down and that exercise yard. But there's a river that goes round the whole prison, and there was something. What was it, a party boat or something? Yes, so there's a nightclub in Doncaster somewhere, and they have this boat and they do boat parties. And this boat was coming round on New Year, playing music, and everyone was partying. Could hear all the fireworks, and they was playing songs like "Please Release Me," so you could actually hear it when he was in his cell. And I found that quite unusual.
I think though when I was in Doncaster, they gave them a list of songs that they couldn't play because they were going past on a Friday night.
Yeah, Please Release Me.
I want to break free and stuff like that.
Yeah, and that was like. That was a kick in the teeth, to be honest, when you sat there and then there's people on a boat driving past you, never mind your family and your friends who are all out, and then there's a boat driving past you saying, "Please release me." I found that quite strange, to be honest.
That's really weird. That's so interesting. I wonder what is on that list of songs that they're not allowed to play. I feel like "Please Release Me" should probably be on it.
Yeah.
Okay, so you mentioned, Reece, that when you first had Christmas in prison, you were in a youth institution. What was it like then in the adult institutions and that kind of transition? How were the Christmases, the next 3 Christmases for you?
So they've all been different, but I would say the probably the most. I would say the first one was the most traumatic, and I'd say the last one was probably on different ends of the scale. But the last one that I did was Christmas of 2017, and was in high security unit again, and we was to be honest with you, like, without going into too much detail of what I was doing in prison and how I was making money and stuff, but I was making money in prison. In fact, I can talk to you about this because it's well documented. But I was making money in prison, and we was obviously doing bits and pieces in there with contraband and stuff. So like 2 weeks before Christmas, which I was explaining to you earlier, there was kind of unwritten kind of law with the staff, like an unwritten rule that people would put hooch down. And anyone who doesn't know what hooch is, it's obviously homemade alcohol what we make in prison. And we would get all the supplies together through the stuff that we were selling throughout the months coming up to Christmas, and we'd stock it all, sugar, tomatoes, to make this hooch. And then we had guys who used to distill it and make it into homemade vodka. So like a month before Christmas, we would start stocking up all of the alcohol what we was going to be having at Christmas. And the officers basically did this thing called bolts and bars, where they'd come and check to see if everything was still fixed. And they'd check the windows and the bars to make sure that there was nothing being interfered with. But a month before Christmas, the officers didn't do bolts and bars correctly. they knew people had hooch in the cells, and basically the senior officer said to us, if you could, well, look, as long as you guys behave, there's no violence on the wing, no staff assaults, no one's going over on drugs, no one's having spice attacks, there's no ambulances called. You can drink as much as you want, but just make sure you go behind your door at 5 o'clock so we can go home to our family. And that's my last experience of prison, and it's the last Christmas I did. And that was what I can only describe, and I'm not trying to glorify this to anyone because I wouldn't do that, but what I can only describe as a carnival atmosphere, to be honest. We had cheesecakes that we'd made. All the lads had chipped in, like some lads had put biscuits in, some. So we had cheesecakes, alcohol. You know, Sunday dinner, the Christmas dinner wasn't that bad. And I was on servery, so we had loads of stuff left over, and it wasn't actually that bad. And we made the best of a bad situation. And there were some good people on that wing there. I think that's what probably made Christmas quite all right on that wing, because there was a lot of people doing long sentences who wanted to go home, and a lot of quite more, I would say, sophisticated criminals on there, as opposed to some of the criminals that are in the lower category of prisons. And I think that's what probably did it. And the fact that we organised this massive party, and we had the party, and the officers, the screws, didn't really have a problem with us doing that.
So to go back to the point about there being slightly more sophisticated criminals, like people doing longer sentences, maybe, why do you think that impacts the atmosphere? Is it because they know they're in there for a long time and so they want to make the most of it? Like, what do you think? What is it about that makes the difference?
I think in the prison system there's a hierarchy of criminals. Now, the wing that I was on in that was a high security prison. I would say everyone was category A, and everyone kind of is living with each other for a long period of time. So even if there's someone you don't like, you have to somehow find some attribute that you like about him, because otherwise it's just not going to work. And because the high securities are such a closed estate, even if you move to another prison, you're going to come across them again. So everyone kind of like has a bit more respect in them prisons, because I noticed when I got decategorized and went into the lower categories, people were playing music and stuff like that at 3 o'clock in the morning, shouting, screaming, talking out of windows. The high securities are nothing like that. If you play music after 10 o'clock, there's a strong possibility when you come out in the morning, someone's going to, you know, swill you or stab you. That's the atmosphere that it is. So it's a very nervous atmosphere, and I think with the high securities and the people that you've got in there, people who are doing some of them have got no prospects of being ever released. They've got whole life tariffs, so they'll never see daylight again. And everyone just has to kind of live together and make the most of it. But I did find that the difference in the high securities and the low securities was quite different, to be honest. And I would say because of the sophistication of the people who were in there, there wasn't really that many drugs and stuff in there. There wasn't many drug users. A lot of them were like, you know, international drug dealers, armed robbers, you know, really quite high level criminals. I'm not going to name them, but I've been in prison with quite some high level people. And I think the organisation that they used outside and with their crimes obviously reflected on how that prison run, and how them wings run, and it was very, very organised, them wings.
That's really interesting, I think, because I wouldn't imagine that there was a difference, but I can completely see why there is for people who are in there for a long time. And as you say, the term sophisticated is an interesting one. I was trying to naturally find a segue to my next question, which was about the food and Christmas dinner, because I feel like that's a massive part of Christmas. And I just want to know how good is the Christmas dinner? Is it normal? Is there anything that you wish they'd put on? Talk me through Christmas dinner.
Right, Christmas dinner. Say the average prison meal on a Sunday, when you have a Sunday dinner, say it costs £1 to make. The Christmas dinner might cost £2 to make. So if you do add a bit more to it, But I had mine at 10 o'clock in the morning, which, to be fair, felt a bit weird. And then I had a cold sandwich in the evening.
So kitchen staff can go home.
Yeah. But if you do sort of make an effort to get you better quality food, I noticed, because I was working on the bins, that the vegetarian Christmas meal was Linda McCartney food, as opposed to just bog standard whatever vegan stuff. So if you do make an effort to accommodate prisoners.
I must admit, I read an article once about the Christmas dinner situation, and it was about Christmas dinner in prison. And I think it turned out, and there was a bit of a scandal around it. I don't know where I read this, but it was a long time ago. But I read somewhere that the Christmas dinner in prison is actually more expensive than school dinners at schools.
To be honest, that doesn't massively surprise me, which is incredibly sad. But the points about Linda McCartney, that's a solid vegetarian. Speaking as a vegetarian, I'd be very happy with a Linda McCartney Christmas dinner, to be honest. So yeah, no, that's brilliant.
But obviously, again, my experience is different to his, because if I was in the high securities again, so we had the facilities to actually cook our own food in there. Because people are doing over a certain amount of time in there, they do facilitate on each spur that you've got cooking facilities, so you don't have to eat prison food.
That's interesting. So when you say you don't have to eat prison food, what do you mean? Explain that a little bit more.
So you can order your own food and cook your own food, and that's something that they encourage you to do to kind of maintain independence and, you know, maintain some kind of skills that obviously you are doing a long time, and it's a bit of a comfort to you. So they have cooking facilities on each wing where you can use you know, pots and pans and different things, and you can actually order your own food, and you can actually, like you're doing weekly shopping, you're entitled to more money when you do that, as opposed to eating the food that's just made in a kitchen and served.
Okay, interesting. So what kinds of food would you see being cooked on Christmas Day? Just anything, or is it just a thing where you make your own version of a Christmas dinner?
What we used to do is we had a thing called a food boat. So what would happen is you'd have like 10 guys on a food boat. So they would order, you'd say to someone, right, are you on, if they was on your food boat, what would happen is you'd say, like, we need 10 bags of rice. So, you know, Martin, you buy 10 bags of rice. This person buys a steak. So what would happen is everyone would make it into like a hamper each week. So they would buy all the different stuff, and then we would make it. And then on Christmas Day that year, that last one that I did in 2018, we had Caribbean food. The Yardies, Jamaicans, made us Caribbean food. There was some guys who were from Saudi Arabia who made some Asian food. So we had like a buffet on Christmas, and we just had food from all over the place, what all the people had made, and there were Chinese on the food. But so all the time we was always having different food. So some days I'd cook, some days they'd cook. So it was always different. So Christmas Day we didn't actually have like a Christmas dinner as such, but we had a lot of food there, what we'd obviously bought ourselves and obviously did, you know, made.
That sounds amazing, to be honest. To go quickly back to, because I heard you say about when Mark was saying about having a cold sandwich in the evening, that was so the kitchen staff could go home. Yeah. Did you see a noticeable difference? Because I'm assuming they use a smaller amount of staff on Christmas Day. Did that affect the sort of day-to-day running of the prison? Did you notice anything, or was it just a case of they were trying to get back, so you got put behind the door earlier, you know, you were eating cold stuff for dinner?
I think obviously it goes on to a weekend regime, so there's no movement in the prison anywhere on Christmas Day, as there isn't on most weekends unless you're going for visits. But obviously I think the last visit is Christmas Eve. There isn't visits on Christmas Day. But I think this is where it comes down to staffing, the people who are staffing the wings. And what I was talking to you earlier is is the staff on them wings have worked on them wings for a long time and build up a relationship with you and just say to you, look, we are understaffed. We know that. Don't mess about, or you're just going to ruin the whole thing for everyone. And there's a mutual understanding. They let us do what we're doing. They sit in the office and do what they're doing. They understand. They're sympathetic to our cause. That, you know, we're in prison at Christmas, can't see our families, so they let us. They turn a blind eye, let us have a drink, whatever. And then obviously the other side of that coin is they've got to get home to their families. So we need to go behind our doors, not be causing any problems. And I think that works nicely. It's when you get new staff coming in with an attitude of, right, I learned this at college. This is what they told me to do. So this is what I'm going to do by the book. But prisons don't run like that.
Interesting, because I do think it's a bit of a trial by fire as well, isn't it? Of, you know, you can learn all of this stuff around how prisons work and how to work in a prison, but actually going in and working in one, I imagine, is really, really, like I say, trial by fire. Just you have to adapt to how that particular prison works. So yeah, interesting. Okay, let's move on to talking about how your family managed to kind of cope with you being in prison. I mean, you mentioned that the last visit is on Christmas Eve, so talk me through a little bit about how your family's managed to deal with it.
I know my family on the first sentence were absolutely heartbroken, but I've always had the visit on Christmas Eve, so I've always kind of seen them. But I know my family didn't like when I were in prison. I mean, especially my grandma. I'm like my grandma's favourite, even though I'm one of 10 children. My grandma is just like, she's the total opposite to what I am, and she's got a lot of time for me. And I think it broke my grandma's heart that I wouldn't be there for Christmas. And then obviously I've gone on and done more and more time. And I think that my family kind of thought that first experience of mine was that traumatic that I'd never go back to prison. But I ended up being in prison from 2011 going through to 2018. And I think they're quite surprised, to be honest.
Well, Martin, I was in prison in London, so I didn't really get the visits anyhow. But I had a lot of phone calls with my mum and my girlfriend at the time. They were both upset that I wasn't there. Christmas Day, there was just my parents, and my girlfriend was at home by herself. I think she worked a little bit because she had to know what to do. It does have an effect on your loved ones as well. There's the prison sentence, and I think Christmas Day is one of the days when people feel it more.
And did you find that talking to them, so being on the phone with them, having visits from them, made it easier, or did it make it kind of harder because it reminds you of what you're missing and it reminds you that they're having a really tough time? I mean, for you personally, I imagine the visits helped for them, but did it help for you?
I suppose it depends on the person. For me, it was like talking to my family because in the morning, my brother and sister had to come around to my parents. So I spoke to them there. I couldn't tell my niece or nephew where I was working away. Yeah, my girlfriend at the time, that was a bit different because I knew she should be doing her own stuff. I was just concerned that she was a bit lonely.
Yeah, absolutely. Reece, what about you? How did you handle speaking to or having visits from family around Christmas time?
I think on the last one, which is probably the most important one to focus on. I mean, the first one we already know, like, it was just heartbreaking. It wasn't good at all. But I think on the last one, I was that far gone in and set on the path that I was on that I didn't really care, to be honest. If I'm going to be brutally honest, I didn't really care that I was in prison. I didn't really care what was happening. I had this in my mind that I was a criminal, and I think I did a podcast about this and spoke about what happened. And I think the only way I can describe it is like a stroke of insanity, where I think I was that set on what I wanted to do and my end goal that prison had long lost its effect on me, and I was that set on my path that I was going to go. When I was getting released, I was going to go to Spain, I was going to go to Marbella, and I did all that, and I ended up committing crime out there as well with people that I met in prison. And I just think I was that far gone that I didn't even really think about how it was affecting other people at that point.
That's really interesting. I mean, it's not Christmas related, but when you say about being set on a path, can I ask what it was that made you want to change your path and stop committing crime?
Yeah. So I met a guy in prison, and we went to Spain together, and we got involved in a few things out there in Port Banús in Marbella. And just before COVID was starting, I obviously was out there a couple of times, and then I came back, and my business partner was actually shot on a deal that went wrong in Bulgaria, and I was meant to go on that deal, and he was obviously murdered in 2019. That kind of knocked it out of me a bit. Then my son was born, and he was born premature, so I couldn't really concentrate on anything else that I'd concentrate on because my son needed me so much. So it kind of, for that sort of like 8 weeks that he was in hospital, kind of took me out of circulation a bit, where the only thing that really mattered to me was my son. And then obviously my partner had been killed in that deal that went wrong in Bulgaria, and that was like that. And then what I've seen over the last sort of 3 years is a lot of associates of mine and friends have been murdered and have been obviously arrested and jailed, and operations that have gone on with EncroChat and all different stuff. I'm seeing a lot of people that I once was involved with and knew that are in a very terrible situation.
That sounds really traumatic. I'm so sorry to bring that up. I was not expecting it to be that someone close to you was murdered, so I'm sorry about that. It also makes me feel really bad because my next question was going to be about presents, and I feel like that's a really I don't know. I don't quite know how to make the transition from that into did you ever get presents when you were in prison? So I'll just leave that one with you, and you take it from there.
Now, there's no presents in prisons, but I think the chaplain service.
You can get stuff sent in.
Yeah, I mean,
like a new top or something like that, or a book. There's certain stuff that you can get sent in.
But there's no wrapping paper on presents, is there? No.
I was going to ask then that, so if you could have received one present whilst you were in prison, what would it have been to make your life slightly better?
I'll tell you mine. The key for the main gate.
Yeah, that was a stupid question. Fair enough.
I don't know, because I had everything when I was in there, because I didn't smoke, I didn't drink, so I'd built up money and I just spent loads on chocolate.
That's fair enough. Sounds like my kind of Christmas. Yeah, okay.
If I was going to have anything that I was allowed as a present, I mean, we had phones in there, and I did FaceTime my family on an illegal phone in there on Christmas Day. But I think if I could have anything, I'd have a smartphone. Yeah.
Okay, just so you can keep in contact with people better, access to the internet, that kind of thing.
Yeah, you know, a few Facebook posts and stuff. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Really? Would that have improved things, being able to make posts on Facebook?
Would it what, sorry?
Would that have improved things for you, being able to make posts on Facebook?
No, I'm joking. I just think the smartphone would be good to have for prison. I know they are talking about them now, where you've got certain things that you can do on them, because you know, it's a bit more intimate, isn't it? You know, if you can actually speak like on FaceTime and you can see people, and you know, I just think when I did FaceTime them on that phone that I had, because I had a smartphone in prison, and I think that day when I did it on Christmas, it meant a lot more to me than just obviously on the blower. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I do think being able to see them would have, I'm
Yeah.
sure, made a massive difference. Okay, so kind of getting to the final bits and bobs. So I will say to everybody else, start thinking of any questions that you might have, pop them in the chat, and you know, I'll hand over to other people in just a minute. But what was it like your first Christmas once you had got out of prison? Was it a massive difference? Did you do loads of stuff that you couldn't do, or were you kind of just low key, you know, this is nice, you know? Tell me what it was like for your first Christmas once you got out.
Right, well, not my first Christmas when I got out from the first time, but last Christmas I got out on the 20th of December. So that was the Monday, and I think Christmas Day was the Friday. By the time I'd got home, done a bit of Christmas, I was shattered all week because I was looking forward to getting out for Christmas. So I rarely slept a lot, and when I got out, I travelled up from London on the train. I was tired. I went out Christmas Day with my girlfriend and her mum for an Indian, but I was half asleep through it all, and it took me about a week, 2 weeks to readjust. And that was only a short sentence.
So were you tired just because just getting back out into the real world, shall we say? Like, what is it that makes you so tired?
Well, I think it was because it was COVID's time last year, so you were locked up all the time. But I wasn't sleeping. I was just, and then the night before I wasn't sleeping, and then when I got out, I had people to see, Christmas presents to buy. I was doing that. I had a few drinks with my friends, and it knocked me for 6. But come Christmas Day, I was shattered, and I was asleep early. But
I'm not surprised. The fact that
it took me
people
about 2 weeks
expected,
to readjust.
yeah, the fact that people expected you to buy them presents, I'd be like, no, sorry. Like getting out of prison on the Monday, buying people presents for the Friday. That's
Well, if you didn't expect any, but I had some money, so I thought, you know what I mean? It's
oh. No, that's lovely. Speaking of COVID, that's a good point. Did either of you, well, Reece, did you experience a COVID Christmas and a non-COVID Christmas? I don't know if, oh wait, no, if you got out in 2018.
No,
No.
I was out before the COVID.
Oh,
I
okay.
was in prison at the start of COVID, and then I was in prison last year while COVID restrictions in the prison were still on. The first one, I had a job. I was doing the bins, as I said, so I was out every day from my cell, and the days passed a lot quicker. But the last time, you were just locked up in your cell all day, and that would have probably made Christmas a lot worse as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine. Okay. Reece, tell me about your first Christmas once you were out of prison. What was it like?
Probably overindulged, to be honest. I ended up in hospital. I was out drinking, went to Liverpool, went to Manchester, and ended up in hospital with. I got an infection in my throat, I think from probably drinking too much, and I just kind of I was ill for quite a long time after it. So that I just think I tried to do everything at once, and it didn't really work out the way I anticipated.
That's probably the best way to put it. What I was doing as well in the short period of time from out till Christmas, trying to fit everything in.
And it ended up with me laid in a hospital bed. So it wasn't wasn't too clever, to be honest.
No, I feel like that's a really good way to put it, trying to do everything at once, just trying to cram it all in, particularly for you, Mark, where you've only got 5 days to really take advantage of everything. But yeah, okay, fantastic. I mean, I've kind of come to the end of my questions. So if anyone has anything that they want to ask, I mean, I'm hoping you guys are all right to answer questions, not strictly related to Christmas, but just prison in general. And whilst people are thinking about that and putting anything that they want in the chat, do you want to just talk about your charity and what you're trying to do and the things that you're trying to achieve?
Yeah.
I'll let you do that.
So we came up, I've known Mark for like 15 years. Mark was in prison last year for something that happened a few years previously, but because of COVID, it had been delayed. So Mark actually changed his life probably about 4 years ago, but because of something that happened a long time ago, he had to, and obviously things had been delayed through the COVID. He ended up getting a sentence miles down the line, even though he changed his life. Anyway, that's besides the point. So when Mark was in prison on the last sentence, we'd already done some charity work with different charity. And we were basically writing to each other about what Mark was going to do upon his release. And we both, really strangely, I'd already had a conversation about a similar thing that Mark said. I'd had a conversation probably about 2 weeks before Mark wrote it to me. And I don't know if it was because Mark was in a London prison and it might have been getting spoken about down there. I'm not sure, but it's strange that we both were on the same path, so to speak. And we decided that we was going to try and do a knife amnesty to take knives off the street and go into schools. But we didn't really realise what we had this idea, but we didn't really know what we was going to do with it. Anyway, Mark comes out of prison and we sat down and we set it up, and we've gone into schools, universities, been to Downing Street. What we've achieved in the last 11, I'd say 10 months, is quite incredible, to be honest.
That's fantastic. And whilst you've been talking, we've had a few questions, which I'm very relieved about because sometimes nobody will ask anything. So let's start with Alex's question about why were you actually in prison? What crimes did you commit that led you to prison?
My main offences were possession of firearm with intent to endanger lives, and witness intimidation and jury interference.
Mine's all been public order violence.
Okay, interesting. And Alex did also ask a follow-up about the fact that you've both returned to prison at some point. So what do you think would have prevented you from reoffending? Because prison obviously didn't act as a deterrent. So what do you think would have stopped you from going back to prison at that point in your life, if anything?
Spoke about this before, haven't we? But you were saying.
I think if you would have my offending, or certainly some of the stuff that I've been involved in, or the pursuit of what I've been involved in, has been finance. So a lot of my offending, what I've been involved in, and has created this story is to do with finance. And I think had I have had some better opportunities. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that I didn't have any opportunities, because that's not true. But I think a lot to do with my upbringing, and is that fair to say? It's a hard one. It's a difficult one. I think, to be honest, I don't think, if I'm going to be brutally honest, I set out to be a criminal and I became one. And that's what I wanted to do. And I know that it's not probably that. I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, the reason because my mum and dad split up is because this happened, or this happened in my life. I just think that I was around people who were committing crime, being around it all my life. My brother's doing 35 years for murder, for a gangland assassination, and I think I've just kind of been born into that way of life, and I probably just did what was offered to me, or what I've seen around me. And that's just the way it's been for me.
But as you said before, when you were in young offenders, if they just put you away for a weekend, that would.
My argument is this, Lindsay, and I will stand by this, and I've spoken to a lot of people about this who have done time. If you would have put me in that prison on the Friday night when I first got sent down, and you took me out on the Monday morning, where I didn't have any time to settle, didn't have any time to meet anyone, I just was absolutely that shock horror of them 2 days. I know they used to do sharp shock, which was 3 months. That's too long because it gets you into the regiment and the regime of things. But if you'd have took me out of there on the Monday morning, shaken up as I was, I'd have probably never committed another crime again. And that is probably the truth on that matter.
That's really interesting. I think that's I wonder how that would work in practice, because I totally see what you're saying about 3 months is enough time to start acclimatizing and getting to know people. And I know we've spoken before about how you make a lot of contacts when you're in prison. Somebody has asked, actually, Elizabeth asked, are you still friends or in touch with any of the people that you met in prison?
Yeah, the difficulty with this, and I probably haven't, and I'm just going to be honest, I probably haven't lived to the formula that I set out to do. I'm a very loyal person, and I think I've got friends who are still doing whatever they're doing. That I don't involve myself in what they do, but I do sometimes have a drink with people. But someone did say to me, it's not always a good idea to do that. But I'm so confident in what I'm doing and the path that I'm on that I can go and have a drink with these people, and they're very, very clear, and I'm very, very clear that whatever they do is not anything to do with me. I don't want to know. I don't want to hear about it. I'm not interested. I don't want to be offered opportunities. I'm not interested. And the people around me that are very respectful towards me and understand my journey and where I've been and what I've been through, and understand that enough was enough for me, and I had to break that cycle, and I did. I don't, if they're still doing what they're doing, that's entirely up to them. But I would prefer that they kept it away from me. But to answer the question truthfully, I do still have friends who I've been friends with because they've been there all my life. Do you know what I mean? So it would be hard to turn away from someone who I've gone through school with and grown up with, and just because he's doing what he's doing or we've done crime together, that I just said to him one day, "Oh no, that we can't speak anymore." But they're very respectful to me, and I'm very respectful to them. They know that I'm on this path and what I'm doing. They're very supportive of it, and vice versa.
My last sentence, there was about 12 of us co-accused, and a majority of them I'm still friends with. I see other people who I've seen on the past sentences up north in a town sometimes. Say hello to them and stuff like that. I have a few phone numbers of friends, but and it's nothing sort of like a business contacts or it's purely a friendship thing with me.
Yeah, it almost sounds like you're I don't know, something similar to like an addiction almost, when you're saying about like that sounds like the advice that you would get from Alcoholics Anonymous or something like that, about, don't put yourself in that position. When you're saying, I don't want to hear about it, I don't want to know, I don't want any opportunities, nothing. It sounds sort of similar to something like that, which I can imagine it is, because it I don't know, I feel like maybe that's something that you have to.
Well, what is with me? It's like I was just there doing my time. I had people because I was down south. They were trying to get links up north, and I'm like, I aren't bothered. I'm not into that. I'm here doing my time, and that's it. But then some of the lads who I met up the north, I actually see him in town, and I have a friendly relationship with him, really.
Yeah. Interesting. Right, we've got loads of questions, so I'll get to Kelsey when I get down to Kelsey, and we'll see. That might have to be the last one, but we'll see how we are for time. Lauren has asked, why does it seem that in high security prisons you get more luxuries? For example, when you were talking about cooking your own food, having a lot more variety, is that due to the severity of the crimes? Like, why is it you get weirdly a little bit more freedom almost in a high security prison?
Because the cat airs are a volatile ticking time bomb, and you've got people in there with no prospect of ever being released from prison, and one wrong move in there, and I know this sounds very brutal, but there is documentaries about it, and if you want to watch them, I think there's just been one on Channel 5 about Franklin Prison, and I know there's one coming out about Full Sutton Prison, which is also high security. And basically, I've seen a guy's throat cut over an apple. So that's the kind of environment it is. And I think because it's so volatile, there needs to be a meet in the middle from the authorities and the prisoners, because life's cheap in them places. And I think if they didn't give you them kind of, I wouldn't call them luxuries, because it's not a luxury when you've got no prospect of ever getting out of prison, or you doing in excess of obviously 6 years. I don't see what's luxury about being able to cook a bit of food.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point about the language that sometimes gets used. But then I think if you were in a prison where that wasn't an option, you probably would view that as a luxury. But I totally get what you're saying about it doesn't feel like a luxury. It feels like quite a basic thing, doesn't it? The right to kind of cook your own food and have that choice.
Yeah, I mean, when you're surrounded by terrorists and, you know, psychopaths who, you know, some of them have killed their own mothers, being able to cook a bit of steak isn't really that luxury, is it? Because every day you walk out of that cell, you're just paranoid, thinking, you know, there's a little unwritten rule again in the cat airs, and if someone's, you always say good morning to everyone. So when you come out your cell, you say, all right, mate, you're all right, yeah. And you know what happens if you don't say that, that guy then goes back to his cell, starts plotting, thinking, why is he not saying that to me? That's the environment it is. It's very, very eggshell environment.
Yeah, no, and I think I can see what you mean about providing those, well, doing anything really to kind of stop that ticking time bomb going off, like you say. Chloe has asked, has your views on the prison system changed either positively or negatively since coming out of prison? I appreciate as well, sorry, we've only got 5 minutes left. I mean, hopefully we can just keep going until we finish, but if people start to drop off, then I'll make sure I send the recording round and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, yes, have your views on the prison system changed since you came out?
I don't think prison works. That's my opinion. I don't think it works. I think it's you put too many people amongst each other with traumas and different problems and networking, and you're able to. No one can teach you how to commit the perfect crime in prison, because obviously they wouldn't be in prison, would they, if they could commit the perfect crime? But you certainly know how not to get caught, because everyone's been caught. So for me, I did come out of prison, I would say, a bit more schooled and a bit more up to date on how to commit crime. Yeah. So I don't think prison works. I think a lot of the schemes and the courses that they pilot in prisons have already been deemed to be unsuccessful in different countries. I don't know why we're still doing it, but it comes down to another argument of mine, which I do think is really negative about the system. And my massive gripe with it is I don't really think they want people to stop committing crime, because far too many people who are committing crime profit off people committing crime. So your judges, magistrates, police, probation, and I don't believe that the prison system is adequately set up for people to stop offending.
That's interesting, because we've just done some sessions for first years around privatisation of prisons and probation and the impact that has. And that is, that is people making money off people being in prison.
So when you talk about this is what I've done an article about this before. It's called The Proceeds of Crime, yeah? So you read a newspaper and it says, drug dealers arrested, jailed for 17 years, £5 million pocker executed, Proceeds of Crime Act order. Who actually profits from crime? Because I know the criminals aren't profiting from crime, but I know the judges, the magistrates, probation officers who are telling you you should stop committing crime. But I had this argument with a probation officer and I said to her, If you tell everyone, and everyone in the probation service tells everyone getting released from prison never to commit a crime again, do you realise that you're going to be out of a job just quite shortly, and your mortgage, everything is surrounded by me committing crime? And she didn't have a reply from her, because it's the truth. She wouldn't be in a job. She wouldn't have a lifestyle if it wasn't for people like me, or what I was, committing crime. She's profiting off me, off my misery, to be honest.
I feel like we could talk about this for hours. I feel like there's so many different ways of, and it's a really interesting conversation. But I've still got like 5 more questions to go. So sorry, Reece, we'll come back to that one. We'll do another session on it. So Lauren has asked, now that you're out of prison and you're leading a more normal life, do you get any kind of flashbacks of your time in prison, and does it affect you? Do you think about it quite regularly, or have you been able to sort of compartmentalize it and say, yep, that happened, especially now that you've changed your path so drastically?
To be fair, before I went to prison the second time, I'd be looking at Open University, but I wasn't really sure about the funding. And then when I went to prison, I started studying, and because of that, I'm happy that I went to prison, because I've managed to do this. But because I've started it in prison, I'm under a different set of rules when it comes to forums and stuff like that. So even though I'm paying for it, I aren't getting the full experience of my Open University.
Do you think about prison every day?
I don't think about prison every day, but that's the only thing that really gets me thinking, is getting this bit overturned so I can get the full benefit.
Mine's different. I think about prison every single day. From the day that I was jailed in 2011, my life's never been the same. And I do think about it every single day. And I probably think about it, I'd say, probably about 10 times a day. And I think about choices that I've made. I think about people that are no longer with us. I think about if I'd have done this, differently. I'm full of different scenario. I mean, my offending and the people I became involved with are completely different to what Mark was doing. And I've just watched one of my friends be arrested in Spain 2 months ago, and he's been named as one of Europol's biggest money launderers, and that was a very close friend of mine. So that's what I'm having to deal with, and I'm seeing people, like I said, going to prison from who have been around their kids, I've been around their houses, and they're going to prison for 20 years, and with people dying, and my business partner died. So I can't help but think about all of it, yeah, to be honest.
Okay. I think just whilst you've been talking then, I'm just going to pop the contact details for you guys in the chat. So if anyone is interested in contacting, there's an email address there where they can reach you. But, you know, if they want to speak to you about anything, I guess. We are at 1:30. Ash, are we okay to carry on for just a little bit, because we've only got 3 more questions? I'm assuming he's running over to the lecture thing as we speak to press the unmute button.
It's fine if you two are happy to stay on for 10 more minutes, then that's fine. But if you don't hear from me, I just wanted to say thank you. I think there was really authentic, honest answers, and that I think everybody's been very taken aback by some of your honesty, but also, you know, it hits home some of the things. And I think, you know, I'd just like to thank you. I know that you're going to be coming back in at some point in the new year as well, and I think the work that you're doing is very great. So keep it up, and you know, thank you very much for your honesty and you know, telling the actual real story as well, Reece, about what it's actually like in prison. And Marks, I think that's very beneficial to the students. But yeah, fine, stay on.
Yes.
So Amy has asked, was there a lot of disorderly conduct, like fights and things like that? And you've kind of touched on this briefly about, were you ever sort of afraid for your life at any point when you were in prison?
I was in prison in London, and people always think it's going to be harder down there. I found it a lot easier because in London they were more bothered about your postcodes. So I was just a northerner down south. I didn't get any trouble. Every disorderly conduct and stuff, as Reece was saying, it depends on the categories. I was category B, and that's where everyone goes in at first, and then you get categorised.
Dispersals there.
Yeah, but that's basically where you get people in who could be in for like 4 weeks, who will just cause trouble. But I was kept alone.
And mine's different. I was in fear of my life, yeah, quite a lot. I've seen some horrific things in there, and I know this sounds really awful, and it's not probably what everyone wants to hear, but when you see someone, because this is the downside to the cat airs, is with these cooking facilities. If you see a pan of oil burning, because you can have obviously cooking oil in there, if you see that bubbling for an hour, you know that's going over someone. And all I can say, when that goes over someone and you see the skull basically peel off them and it drips down the face and it melts the whole face, I know it sounds really terrible to say this, but all you're thinking at that moment in time is rather you than me. And that's the environment where I've spent 5 years. That's how I feel about it. I was in fear for my life, because if someone can do that to someone else, there's nothing to stop them from doing it to you.
It sounds absolutely terrifying, like a constant terror.
Everyone's perspective is a different, isn't it?
Yeah.
Nothing's the same.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Okay, Lauren is asking, did you receive support when you got out of prison, and to what extent? And also, were there any arrangements that were done pre-release? So did you have any information before you were released, or was it a case that you were released and then it was what's next kind of thing?
I was released high security anyway. My risk level never decreased. So I was released high risk. So that meant even though I had a house to go to, they wouldn't allow me to go home. So I had to go to a hostel where I could be monitored for 3 months, which was a complete waste of time because they didn't monitor anything. Because I could leave there at 6 o'clock in the morning, which I left there at 6 o'clock every single morning, and I returned at 11 o'clock at night. So all they actually monitored was my sleeping pattern. Now, I was on a thing called MAPA 3, Multiple Agency Public Protection. And what that endured is I was never allowed any more than £500 in cash, but no one ever checked up to see if I had more than £500 in cash. One bank account, and had to submit that to probation. And also, if I ever travelled in the passenger seat of a car, I had to give the registration of who was driving it and what the car was, and not to associate with any known or anyone who had a criminal record. So it was like a serious crime prevention order. But no one ever enforced it. So it was absolutely pointless. I didn't gather any support. Everything that we've done is being done by us. We have had to come through this on our own with very, very little support from probation. I was going to see probation once a week, and all they were interested in was who I was associating with, who I was talking to, not how they was going to make me from what's just happened and how traumatic it's been and PTSD and everything else that's happened in my life. All they was interested in was who I was talking to. So no, I didn't anyway get any support that was worth talking about. And like I said, anything that we've done, we've gone up against everything to get this charity going, against all kinds of adversity, the police and all different agencies who have obviously tried to step in the way of us doing this and not believed us, had to go on courses, we've had to finance it ourselves. It's been very, very difficult. So in regards to support, no, there hasn't been any.
I'd probably just agree totally there as well.
It's interesting because a lot of the stuff that you were talking about was very much about prevention of crime, and like you say, nothing about any of the trauma that you've experienced, any mental health support, any kind of financial awareness, or
I think probation. I think that the probation officers try their best, but the system's broken.
Yeah, it's red tape.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So the final question is from Kelsey, and that is around, do you think childhood has a direct effect on why people commit crime? And why do you think some people don't commit crime who have been brought up and been exposed to that lifestyle?
I think I've had this discussion loads of times, and we'll never know the answer to it. My dad was a criminal. My brothers are criminals. My granddad was a criminal. I was a criminal, so I don't know. I don't actually have the answer to that. But then I know people who have been brought up the same way I have, who have never committed a crime. And I've got two brothers who have been brought up in the same environment as me and have never committed a crime and work hard on a building site, never been to prison. And their behaviour was far worse than mine as we were kids. I was like the golden child. I didn't, and then I just switched one day. If you look at my brother Morgan when he was younger, like, he was a little shit, and everyone thought that he would be the one who would get in trouble. But he's one of them. I honestly don't know. I think everyone's different, and I think it's something that's in your DNA. To be honest, I think it's just something in your makeup, isn't it?
Yeah, I was brought up totally different. My dad's a police officer, or a retired police officer, so I've been brought up around the police and around all that. But maybe I just rebelled. Don't know. So everyone's different.
You are almost the perfect example of one of you having all family, well, a lot of family who have committed crimes, and then Mark, you having a father who's a police officer. That did make me laugh when you said that. But yeah, I think that's really interesting. I feel like I've said that about 1 million times during this session. But like I say, to echo what Ash has said, it's been fantastic hearing about everything. Particularly, you know, the Christmas stuff and your views as well on the prison system, because I think I personally believe that it's something we need to incorporate the views of people who have gone through the system. If, you know, especially if you're saying it doesn't work and the support isn't good enough. So yeah, on that note, we are running slightly over, so I do apologise to everyone, but thank you for sticking around. I've put the Changing the Narrative contact info in the chat. I'll also pop my email in the chat, so if anybody has any questions, feel free to drop me a message. And yeah, thank you very much for coming, and hopefully you've all enjoyed it, and we will see you all soon. Bye.
Bye.
See you later.
Bye.
Bye.